Well, good day to everyone who's here. And typical of a program like IE Brown Executive MBA, it's really quite appropriate to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you're zooming in from. My name is Brendan McNally, and I am the program director for IE Brown Executive MBA from the Brown side. And I'd like to welcome you all here today for what we call an open day, an opportunity for prospective students and applicants to get a better understanding of the program, to hear from one of our faculty members who teaches in the program, and from three alumni who are also here with us today to reflect on their experiences and things they gained from the program, and perhaps some really helpful advice for all of you who are thinking about this program, whether it's the right fit for you. So let me make sure I come. So what I'd like to do is just do some brief introductions. Again, I'm Brendan McNally from IE Brown. I have with us Talia Levine, who is zooming in from London, Mitch Tagade, who is in New York City, and Craig McLean from Boston. And then Professor Ed Barrows will be joining us momentarily, and he'll join us in probably about 20 minutes to give his course overview. And so I'm going to do a program overview to get a better understanding of how we organize the curriculum, and how it's going to be delivered. Very, very important for any of you who are thinking about an executive MBA, almost to a program they're different in terms of how much is online, how much is in person, what types of faculty that you're going to get. So I'll spend quite a bit of time on that so that you come away having a good sense of who we are. And then the hope will be is at the end of this program, we'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A, particularly with our alumni. But if not, Emma Lipinski, who is assisting us through this journey this afternoon, which would be about 60 minutes or so. If you put questions in the Q&A or the chat, we'll make sure that we get back to you if there are ones that we don't answer through the course of this session. So I'd like to go with a high-level overview is just to understand this is a program, and this is true of most executive MBAs. It's designed for people who are mid-career professionals. This is people who are working in their current jobs, often who have risen to leadership positions, and for whom a program like this is really important, helpful in terms of improving, enhancing, enriching their business skills to help them in their careers. We like to think the alumni might disagree, but it's a flexible format. We throw a lot at you in this program. The bottom right, in bold, it's 15 months. And so that's something for you looking at programs out there. There are many different lengths of programs. We're likely to be one of the shorter ones, but which is a great benefit. And I think it's for the people who choose IE Brown. I think the length is a very, very important piece of it. The harder part is we have to fit in a accredited curriculum within 15 months. And we do it, and I'll show you better diagrams to do this through 5 face-to-face residencies that we do at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, at IE Business School in Madrid, and where I'm hailing from right now, our residency in Cape Town, South Africa. And then coming around the clock to the bottom left, our goal for you as students in this program is really to meld, to integrate management thinking toolkits, approaches about how you can understand businesses and organizations, and through the lens of excellent business classes. And then a huge piece of what Brown adds to this program is an infusion of courses in social sciences and some humanities that really stretch your thinking about people, about markets, about the history of how Many financial markets have come about, the way things have developed, and with that is a hope that you see how to think about the future and what questions to ask and how to move forward. This program, and one of the things I love, the diagram on the right is the diploma. And it is in Latin. It's actually Jane Doe is not a real person, but the diploma is. And it's the only one with Brown University that's conferred with another institution. So I'll get into this partnership that we have in just a moment. But we're very, very proud of this. The diploma that comes from this program is conferred by both IE University and Brown. So this was one in business speak for all of you who are out there. This was strategic. IE Business School is one of the top-rated business schools in the world. I'll show you some slides in just a minute in terms of all the accolades that they consistently win year over year in terms of their innovation, the curriculum, the quality of teaching, just really top-notch. The Brown University is here in the United States, and Providence, Rhode Island, is a member of the Ivy League, which for many has different connotations, but suffice it to say, it is a research and teaching university. It's been around for over 250 years. And I think that the reputation it has for scholarship and learning, is really based on an insistence on really creating new knowledge and getting people to think through multi and interdisciplinary lenses. So for IE, the idea was, wow, could we find a prestigious advanced thinking U.S. university with whom to partner on a business degree? And Brown, which does not have a business school, was thinking, how do we extend our reach to different parts of the world within business education by adding aspects of a curriculum that would enhance one of the top business programs that are out there? So this program's been at it for 15 years. This next cohort that we're hoping you're considering will be our 16th. And also quite proud of having worked through a lot of the challenges and the bugs to deliver what we think is an excellent experience and a very unique one at that. So here's how we do it. We're going to share with you all the participants, the recording that's here. We'll also send you the slides so that you can go through here. I want to move fairly quickly through a lot of this information, which you can get on the website, and also that we have time with our guests. But this is a program that will cover 26 courses, which are all different lengths. More of the core business classes are going to be longer, and then there'll be a mix of other classes offered both by IE and Brown that might be shorter in length. Doesn't matter to you. We split it up over 4 terms in the 15 months. An important thing to know is that this is almost a 50-50 split between the amount of sessions, teaching, and faculty between both universities. This isn't one where it's completely delivered by IE and they're borrowing on the Brown name, where we do a little bit, or the opposite, where Brown's doing most of it and a little bit IE. This is truly a 50-50 partnership. Much to the probably chagrin of the three alums who are here, you'll be doing 6 and all the way up to, at times, 8 courses. So being flexible, we try to be that way. You will need to be extremely flexible and organized to get through this program, which will be a mix of lectures, discussions, a lot of teamwork, time and opportunity, as well as grades on personal reflections. We make you write. There's quite a bit of the tradition, particularly for Brown, but not exclusively, that much of your work requires you to really think about and analyze issues and challenges, and then express yourself. And that's part of people's personal as well as professional development. Pretty much every class will have both an in-person component to it as well as online. And then we're a cohort size, usually about 40 to 50 students or so. So you can be guaranteed that you're going to, one, know all of your classmates, but your opportunity to know faculty and staff in both of these institutions. So you feel this is very much a personalized experience. All right. What we do is we grouped the courses, those 26 courses that I just referenced, into three categories. At the bottom in the foundation, most important, this is an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration. So you'll be sure to be getting classes that will provide you insights to, as I mentioned, toolkits, analytical approaches that will strengthen your business skills. Things that you would expect around finance and operations and marketing, all will fall into this category. The top left, we group a lot of the classes in terms of workplace impact and leadership. And that's thinking about leadership as an individual, as well as how within organizations change can take place. And then the top right, the strategic foresight, are those classes that we give that we hope help you as an individual and as an organization, as a leader, giving you some foresight. We know that's a pretty complex world that's out there. And within that, we know that you need to be asking the right questions. You need to be thinking about, well, what happened in the future, be what happened in the past. How do we think about it? So we're all faced with tremendous geopolitical changes that are ongoing right now, which can be heart-wrenching and difficult for many. And it's also opportunity for others. We're dealing with AI and a lot of changes that for all of us, if you're not asking questions right now and worried about what the future will look like, then perhaps an EMBA isn't right for you. It's something that we grapple with, we're trying to deal with each day. And so classes that will address those types of questions, we bring in. They're going to come throughout all classes, but in strategic foresight in particular. All right, I'm not going to go through each one of them, but here's just the smattering of the classes that we'll do in terms of looking at strategic foresight. The pictures of the faculty that are over on the right are a number of the mix of both the IE and Brown faculty. When I was putting this slide together quite a while ago, one of the things that I was really impressed by was the diversity of academic backgrounds that the faculty have at both IE and Brown. So as you see down at the bottom of this slide, you'll get faculty, and this is, I think, one of our distinguishing features, is that these are not all business faculty, and not that there's anything wrong with that. This is an EMBA. But what we think is something unique and helpful for your personal and educational development is to have a variety of perspectives, a diversity of understanding of how people look at different issues that we're all faced with. So down here, you could see that within this category of classes, we have everything from business to public policy, humanities, science, law. You're going to get perspectives from a variety of different people. Business acumen. So here's the meat and potatoes, as they say. You would expect an EMBA covering financial accounting, finance, cost control, operations management, marketing, a couple of classes that you'll have an entrepreneurship. We're one of the top accredited programs. I think we have three different accrediting bodies. And interestingly, apparently, there's only a very small, less than a couple percent of business programs that are out there in the world that have all three of those accreditations. And then the workplace impact and leadership, a diversity of classes that we have here, and including the one that I mentioned that Ed will be doing for us in a few minutes, of looking at different perspectives around leadership. Okay. There, of course, are opportunities for sort of the applied learning. We have a capstone project that students embark on, usually about a third of the way into the program. The topic is one that they choose, and they have an opportunity to work within very small teams, usually of 2 or 3 people that you get to choose. We'll pair you with a faculty advisor. And what we find is that it's a mix of topics that students choose that are either ones that are really quite relevant to their professional lives, and a great way to justify to your company, your organization, why are you doing this, that you're able to embark on a program, a project like this, or it's something that's really true to their heart, and something that they feel is an important business, organizational, leadership challenge that needs to be addressed. In the entrepreneurial management class for executives is an opportunity to understand early stage ventures, of which some of our panel are pros, and what happens at those early stages. And through this course, teams of students do a startup. And then we have a class that has been associated with this opportunity called Entrepreneurial Opportunities in Developing Regions, that some of the work that we do here in Cape Town, where there's a tremendous amount of field work where people are exposed to customers, to stakeholders, to the entrepreneurs in a resource-constrained, very challenging environment, and really getting our students in IE Brown to think about what it is to wake up the next day to say, what do you do next? So great opportunities in this program to actually do. Okay. As I mentioned, we're structured that it's 15 months, and we have 5 residential periods. We start the program in very early March each year at Madrid, at IE in Madrid, and we go for 2 weeks. This doesn't do it justice. There's 3 months usually in between each one of these columns here of online work, which is primarily a mix of synchronous Zoom classes and asynchronous forum discussions that are set up by the faculty. In June, we come to Brown for 2 weeks. We go back online. We go to Madrid. And this is actually, oh yeah, you're covered. We have the 1 week immersion in January in Cape Town, and then we follow up with a week of classes at Brown and then graduation at Brown. So it's this beautiful symmetry where you'll start out at IE, where we have convocation, where you get a great welcome in Madrid to say begin the program, and the bookend on the other end will be graduating at Brown University 15 months later. Okay, as I mentioned, the Cape Town experience is an opportunity to understand what it's like to work in a developing economy. And in particular, what we like to do is expose students to major industries and sectors. We've done in prior years a lot of work within the townships where the teams are trying to understand what it is that an entrepreneur needs to do to succeed. We integrate and shore up this week with lectures beforehand from experts, a lot of field research that the students need to do beforehand, and then a very intense opportunity to talk to stakeholders who are there or here, that's where I am right now, with understanding what it is that that entrepreneur needs to do to grow. For some of our students, being in an environment like the townships of South Africa is actually something that's within their norm. For most students, it's something that is a very different experience for them. So, depending upon the person, we know for sure that this has been a very important and transformational one for them. But it's our opportunity to really allow the whole cohort to work together to try to really think about often entrepreneurship of necessity, and how one goes about where at times government cannot do what it's supposed to. So therefore, there's a tremendous amount of ingenuity that needs to be put into place by entrepreneurs to get goods, to get services to people to help their communities. This is a program, and we think part of the benefits of coming to all 3 areas, but in particular coming to Cape Town, is to be global, to put things into practice for you, and to really kind of fine tune. And again, this is to not for everyone. Some have it already, but we find for a lot of people is to really think about your place, particularly those who come from more developed economies and countries, of what it's like and what customers might be like, what markets might be like, what opportunities might be like in an environment that's very, very different. Okay. I'm going to really go through this quick and all because I don't want to cheat you out of the great opportunities here with Ed and our alumni. But suffice it to say, and this again, more business speak, ROI is return on investment. A couple of important slides here that as we've polled alumni over the last bunch of years, that people are seeing significant gains in salaries and opportunities to move into new roles. The bottom two pieces, we find that the skills that people gain through this program are refined, as well as what they feel in terms of their personal and professional development, incredibly satisfied. As I mentioned, as you're thinking about it, there's lots of programs that are out there. Many of them will be based in a single place. This is truly something where we're going to get you in different continents. We're going to get you at different universities, and you're going to be with a variety of people from across the globe. I mentioned earlier about accreditation. You shouldn't be looking at any that aren't accredited. We've been very, very fortunate to be accredited by three of the top bodies. One thing, global recognition, where Brown and IE stands that I mentioned to you. I've really kind of had fun. The number of IE, just it's year after year. Well, if you look at what are the top programs, what's the top business school, different offerings, IE continues to always rank within the top 10. QS World Ratings has been one. We, for the last couple of years, have been ranked in the category of these global EMBAs and number five in the world. And very, very proud as you look at these subcategories. Number one in diversity. So for you, if you're thinking about a program like this and you want to be around people from different industries, from different functions within organizations, from different countries with different academic backgrounds, we're the place. This is a really impressive group of people. And I have to say, and this is not kissing up to Ed and the alumni that are here, it's part of the joy of my working in a program like this is to be with such amazing, accomplished people and their need and their desire to grow and to learn from others. Brown, as I mentioned, is part of the Ivy League. That doesn't mean a whole lot. What's more important, is that we're among a group of universities for whom teaching and research are really top of the priority list. And then, as I mentioned, for IE, we always end up in the top 10. The last time I was looking at it a year or two ago was like 9 out of the top 10 categories. IE was in them. Much like as I started out saying, one of the true benefits of this program is you are fully enrolled as a student at both universities. And therefore, while you're in the program and then when you graduate, you have access to the alumni networks of both IE and Brown. So IE is a little bit younger. They were founded in the early 1970s, so they have 75,000 alumni and about 120 from Brown. And those are living. So Brown's been at it for 255 years. So there were a lot more alumni, but as you could imagine, not all of them are with us right now. The number of nationalities for both universities and clubs around the globe as you do networking and call on friends in the future. As I mentioned, if I just emphasize anything, there's a unique approach to the curriculum, but very, very global, we think, in the way we deliver the curriculum, the types of students we have, and where the faculty come from. So this can seem a little bit trite, and I hope my alumni will back me up. But this is a program where we think it challenges you to think differently about people, about problems, about business, about organizations. Um, uh, Driving for change for almost all of you, the motivations for doing a program like this is to be better equipped to do better, good work within your organizations. We have the luxury, and I really do feel it's a luxury and a privilege, we actually get to admit only people who really have demonstrated achievement. So what's very, very interesting is when students first introduce themselves on the first day, they get this imposter syndrome, like, well, why did you select me? And what I can assure everyone who's there is that the talent that gets admitted to this program is truly amazing. And over the course of the 15 months, students really get to appreciate the diversity and the accomplishments of people. Global focus, and then, of course, being flexible, being ready and organized to take on what is, in essence, almost like a full-time commitment to do this program in addition to your professional lives and your personal life. So next steps, the application process. Easy for me to say, a little bit harder for you to do. It's not an onerous process. A couple of personal statements, biographic information. We look for two letters of recommendation. This one can take a while for people if you've been out of school for a while, is getting your transcripts, both for undergraduate work and any graduate work that you do. And then we do require an interview, which we set up once most of the materials are in. We don't need standardized test scores. We feel we can evaluate candidates without that. And given the global nature of our applicant pool and enrolled students, they're not that helpful. And then for this next intake that will start in March of 2026, the application, there's a priority deadline coming up for January 19th in a couple of weeks, and then it's mid-February. If you're at all considering this next cohort, and we often have a lot of people on this session here, get going. And the reason get that application in, if financial aid is a consideration, is we want to get you that information because there's a lot to organize in your life if this works out in terms of the fit between an acceptance and then what you're trying to do. So it's not too late, but strongly advised to giddy up to get going on the application process. All right. So thanks. I know I went a little over time, but I'm thrilled to have my colleague Ed Barrows, who teaches in Brown School Professional Studies. He has his doctorate degree and has just been an advocate for a leadership style that really thinks broadly around what it is to be a leader, what it is for you. He won't give you the answers, but I promise you, he will give you ways to think about who you are, how leadership gets advanced to help you develop within your career. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over. Thanks, Ed.
Hey, thank you very much, Brendan. I really appreciate it. It is nice to see everybody. It's nice to see the alumni too. It's wonderful to see you here. They'll have to be quiet while I talk through having sort of suffered through my classes, but it's fantastic to see everybody. And for the folks on the call and Brendan, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about one of the core courses that I teach that the folks on the call have been involved with too, which is leadership ethics. This is, I think, an important topic today more than ever. Let me go ahead and share my screen and make sure you can see that. Assuming everyone can. Is that the case? Can you see my screen? All right, great, thanks. So just a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. I just want to give you an overview of ethical leadership and a little bit about myself, but really think about ethics as it relates to leadership. I'll give you a quick case study. Some of you may be familiar with unethical challenges in the very real way that an organization you're probably familiar with to think about, and then something for you to consider. So this is a little bit about me. I've been working at Brown. I guess I'm in my third year, and before that, I taught at Boston College as well as Babson College. I worked at Duke Corporate Education for a number of years, and I've also taught at Harvard University in their Division of Continuing Education. So I've had a great fortune of working with, I would say, adult learners, that like the ones in our panel, our STEAM panel, that I think bring a lot of experience into the classroom. And that's what makes, I think, Brown unique in the relationship that we have with IE is the level of, I would say, experience and intellectual curiosity and really the ability to challenge the things that we present from the folks that are in the classroom is really wonderful. And they come from so many varied backgrounds. It's really a delight to be part of. But my work in particular focuses on leadership. In addition to being a professor of the practice of leadership, I'm also the academic director of our new Master of Online organizational leadership. So one of the focus areas that we really think about in this program with IE is what are your responsibilities as a leader in terms of ethics? How do you think about ethics? Now, most people don't go to work every day and as they get in their car, hop on the train or step onto the bus, think, I've really got to think carefully about my ethical leadership today. Most people, I would imagine, don't really think that. We end up making a lot of decisions, and that's really what ethics does for us, is it helps us inform decisions. But we do it oftentimes without I'll say, cognizance of what our ethical thinking or our personal code of ethics is. So I would argue that for you, wherever you end up, ethical leadership is more important today than ever before. First off, let's think about your role as a leader. You have many, many, many more responsibilities than ever before in terms of stakeholder groups. Sure, there's your colleagues, there's your employees, there's your supervisors, but you touch customers, you touch patients in some cases, right? You touch all, partners, you touch suppliers, you touch regulators. You've got a wide variety of stakeholder groups that you're interacting with. And some of those groups may have very different views of leadership ethics. Let's be honest, in many organizations, trust has become scarce, but it's more important than ever before, right? We work, at Brown, we have programs across the spectrum in leadership and technology in our MBA program, but think about technology ethics. Think about what AI is pushing us to think about. Think about healthcare ethics. I am looking at Craig here and thinking about the conversation he and I had around some of the decisions that he's been forced to make or think through. Very real decisions, not theoretical classroom decisions, but real tangible issues that challenge us to build trust in organizations. One of the difficulties in drawing back to my little simple example, when you get in the car or step on the train in the morning, is ethics is oftentimes found in everyday decisions. We don't think about it very much, but what should I take? Should I cut a corner here? Do I really need to tell that person about that thing that I was just ethical decisions oftentimes start in very small everyday decisions, but they can cascade into very, very big ones. So it usually isn't the case that someone has a major ethical issue. There's a lot of things that happen before that we need to be aware of as leaders. Leaders in organizations shape culture. We know you do. When you look at the things that are happening globally, and I won't highlight too many of them in the spirit of time and respect to our different constituent groups. The culture that you set up as a leader has a huge impact on not only the organization's functioning, but also the ethics. The leaders set the tone, even in ways that you don't see. One of the things we talk about in our skills classes are this concept of a leader's shadow. You are judged and viewed as a leader every day in terms of how you act, what you say, how you think. Even in the most innocuous instances, you're casting a shadow as a leader. So what is your ethical shadow you're casting? And then your reputation will depend in large part on your ethics. You will be judged not just in your current role, but the ones beyond them. So for MBA students, you're really preparing to lead in a complex, high pressure world. This ethics concept is not abstract at all. It's very practical. In some cases, it's very strategic. And for you, in many respects, it can be career defining. And I'll ask you to think back as we go through the balance of the discussion. Think about, and there's no participation on this, I don't want any for sure, but think about a situation where someone even yourself, had to make an ethical decision. And even think about a situation where maybe you didn't make the ideal decision that you would have made, or in retrospect, you think, maybe I shouldn't have made that decision. What were the things that led up to that? Was there something that in your own mind that did you make a compromise in any way? And did that impact your decision? So ask yourself as we go through this. Now, in the course that we teach, there's a couple of things that are really fundamental to this concept of ethics. And I show this as kind of this ongoing integrated diagram here. Ethics is about decision making. What should I do in this situation? Whether it's a small choice or a large choice, ethics is fundamentally about making a choice as to what I ought to do in this situation. And oftentimes the issues that we face as leaders are highly ambiguous and complex. So there aren't easy answers. I tell the students I have the good fortune of working with, the easy answers, the easy decisions, they got made a long time ago. They didn't land on your desk. You're stuck with the tough ones. But at the same time, when we make choices, this cumulative effect of the choices that we make develops our character. So whether we think about it or not, we may not be thinking about what is my ethics or what my ethical decisions be today as I step on, the train, but as a function of those decisions over time, this creates who we are and develops our character. We don't think about that very much. But I think a big part of what I try to teach, and I think with Brendan's guidance overall, because he's so helpful and the students as well, is how do we become more, I would say, almost have stronger, not only ethics, but think about our character development as part of that. So it's much more than just giving you the dogma, if you will, around ethical thinking. It's also very much related to who you are as an individual. So what is leadership ethics? Think about that on your own for a moment. I'll just give you a second to think about it. What is leadership ethics in your mind? If you had to define it, how would you? I could call on some of our panelists, but I won't do that out of courtesy, Brendan. And I see some of the people would say. But there's a lot of different definitions as to what leadership ethics is. And I think, a simple composite definition that I use is this one, right? And there's a lot of different definitions out there, but this one I think is sort of useful for our, it's the practice of, again, guiding decisions and behaviors toward outcomes that maximize value for society and all of the stakeholder groups that take into account the biases we have, the nature of trade-offs, and in some cases, moral dilemmas, merely than avoiding wrongdoing, right? That's legal. You can avoid wrongdoing by paying attention to what's legal and regulatorily appropriate. But ethical decisions go further than that, right? They have to do with the choices that impact our own morality. So ethics and ethical leadership is tied to moral awareness, the ability to have good judgment, and taking what we would characterize as responsible action in the face of very competing stakeholder demands, right? Now, again, I think what's interesting about ethics is this notion of we don't think about it very much, yet it impacts us in so many different ways. Now, some of you may have heard about the BCG Gaza Humanitarian Foundation situation. Now, what's alarming for me is that the people that were involved in this went to school where I went to school, and we actually had a component of ethics that was very, very real and tangible. I won't go into details. But what essentially happened with BCG is there were a couple of partners and some analysts at BCG that created a financial model for what it would entail cost-wise to relocate people in Gaza. If you haven't heard about this, it was very prominent in this year. And it created, for very good reasons, a major issue for BCG, right up to and including the CEO in terms of what the implications were. It was work that ought not have been done. It was done sort of, I want to say behind the scenes, but with very little visibility. It caused a huge issue for obvious reasons, costing out relocating people from their, where they're living to other locations. It's obviously something that's highly sensitive in nature. But the real damage here happened to the partners that were relieved from their roles and the reputational impact for Boston Consulting Group. So a couple things to think in mind, like why does this case study matter? Well, we have a moral responsibility, I would argue, as leaders that goes beyond simple compliance. And that's what I was saying a moment ago. You can do things that are legal, but that doesn't make them necessarily ethical. So our standard for performance as leaders is typically higher than that. You can have considerable harm and do, I would say, a very significant level of damage, not just to your own reputation, but also to your perception in the marketplace and how you impact the work that you do. So there's oftentimes indirect harm that comes from your ethical decisions. In a global conflict, and we see these everywhere these days, quite literally, when we look at all the different aspects of global politics, there's a sense of accountability that will ultimately be maintained in conflicts. There's ethics in terms of what's moral in war. What is an ethical or moral war? I think there's actually a PBS special that's coming out or just came out on, what happened in World War II in terms of dropping the bomb and asking ourselves, was that ethical? That's a very important question, and it's one that's been researched, and now we can think about that. So these are very real, both current and retrospective views, but we will always have a question of stakeholder responsibility. How do we create safety in organizations? How do we manage internal dissent around what's ethical and what isn't ethical? And you'll have to make career choices in some cases. And some of you, I would certainly imagine, have been put in positions where you have to make difficult ethical decisions, some of which impact your economic well-being. And this idea of a PR issue, limitations of value neutral experiences, and then ultimately It's thinking about an issue that has to do with not clear wrongdoing, but more around navigating moral gray zones. And this had a huge impact on BCG. It may not be a direct harm, but very indirect. This question of where accountability lies, this intensity of powerful clients now potentially defecting from the firm, and this notion of being silent is really kind of complicit in some respects to action. Now, to delve into the course a little bit and just to kind of tidy things up and then hand it back to Brendan and our panelists is, what's the difference between morals and ethics? We think about that a lot. And it's an important distinction we make early on in the course, and it might be useful for you to think about. Morals have to do really with what I would consider your personal values. What are the things that you believe? How are you acculturated in your family? How are you brought up in your community? Did you have any social organizations or other organizations you're a member of? You really have this composite of morals. Again, most of us don't think about what our morals are, but they're really, we can think about them in terms of what are the things I have to do, I should not do if there's any boundaries, or things that I want to do to be a good person, right? To build our character. When we think about ethics and as it pertains to leadership, I think there's questions that are built on our own morals. And we're asking ourselves, what is morally right conduct, typically accepted by a group? What's good ethical behavior? And if any of you that are on the call belong to, I would say, a professional organization or a society that has a code of ethics, that's a good starting point, right? It asks us how ought we behave as lawyers or as doctors or as accountants or as architects. Do we have a basic set of obligations that we need to maintain for our own professional integrity's sake? That's really important. So we can think about ethics as a set of principles. They typically are group oriented. They can always and oftentimes do aggregate a variety of views and perspectives and sources into something that we can all agree upon and live with, right? That's essentially what we think about ethics, what it has to do with. Now, when we think about the course, what are we grounded on? Well, we do take a sort of retrospective view on philosophy, and we bring this out early on and we say, where do ethics come from, both individually and organizationally? One of the things that we anchor on fairly significantly back to the concept of developing your own character is virtue ethics. What's the right action and what would a good or reasonable or moral or virtuous person do in this particular situation? Because remember, again, ethics oftentimes manifests itself in decision making. We look at Hume's non-cognitivism and we ask ourselves, how would a panel of judges look at our decision and ask if this virtuous group of people were looking at it, would they conclude that that was in fact a good decision to be made? Ultimately, we defer in many respects today when we think about rules-based ethics to Kant and deontology. What is a right action that we can perform under any rule, under any circumstances? It's never good to lie, for instance, or always tell the truth. These are deontological views of ethics. But some of us also have this utilitarian view, which is, well, the outcome really matters most, right? The ends justify the means. Has anyone ever said that? If you do, then you're sort of a utilitarian thinker. And back to Mills with the idea of, if it impacts the greatest number of people and creates the greatest happiness, so to speak, or the best outcome, then that action is right. Now you can start to see here when we have these discussions, we really get at some conflict, right? Because you will get to different decisions depending upon which lens and which ethical leadership theory you look at your particular challenge or decision through. But what we want you to do and ever endeavor to do is give you some grounding in some of the basics that will help you think about these things and really challenge yourself. But I would say the last thing to sort of tidy up our discussion here is really, we want you to come away from the course and we spend a good bit of time on your own personal code of ethics. So I'm going to ask you, do you have one? What is your code of ethics? If a decision is given to you, how do you go about making that? Do you know what your strongest, most important values are? And they're in order, like the most important value I have, the second, the third. If you had to make some trade-off, as we talked about earlier, with respect to your values, how would you do that? What are the boundaries that you have? I will definitely never do this, or I will always do this in this situation. And do you always keep those boundaries? There's positive and negative ethics. I will never do this. Back to the I'll never lie, or I'll always assume to add the most value I can in my workplace. But we ask ourselves as we create these, what does that really mean? Like, what does that tangibly turn into? And then we test and give the opportunity for the students to think about pressure testing their code of ethics with some ethical decisions. And you see on the right-hand side, these are the texts that we use for the course. There's always getting updated. If you personally want some more information on ethics, you could go to this Ron Howard and Clint Korber. It's a little bit long discussion that they have at Google a few years ago, but it's very much related to the book, and I think it'll give you some insights to how we think about ethics here. So with that, I want to thank you for your time today. Hopefully this was illustrative. Brendan, if you don't have any other questions or comments, I can pass it back to you. You are on mute, sir.
Here we go. We've only been doing this for 5 years, right? Apologies. Thank you, Ed. I just love. I have the great opportunity to sit in on classes for this program, and I always love to hear what students have. But I love that Ed and your leadership experience professionally, as well as what you teach, really get integrated into the classroom. So I'm thrilled. I have three alumni. And the joy, I do a number of these types of events each year. I mix it up and all, and I usually get great responses, and this was no exception. So I have three alums with us. Talia Levine, who is now Director of Flight Speakers. She's calling in from London. Craig McLean, who is an anesthesiologist, works with children. He's in the Boston area. And then Mitch Tugade, who is in New York, who's had an amazing career in terms of marketing, and just mentioned to us before we started the session, she's got a new one that she's ready to get going with. So without further ado, I'll turn this slide off. I know it was in the invitation and things. I'll let you all look their profiles up on LinkedIn. One is obviously a bias sample. I chose people who I know did great things within the program, continued, but I got to tell you, I have a deep bench to call from, but I'm just thrilled to welcome the three of you. And with that, what I'd like to do is just ask a few questions. We may go over a little bit on the 60 minutes. So if people need to drop off, as I mentioned, we'll provide the recording. But I know for a lot of people that come to me and with our team as they're thinking about was like, what motivations are there for you as when you were, say, for Talia and Craig, a year and a half, 2 years ago, saying, okay, I think I need this. I want to do it. Is if you could talk about sort of what your motivations were, where you were in your career, and then say, hey, an EMBA is really the right thing. And in no particular order, I'll start with you, Mitch.
Thank you, Brendan, and welcome to everyone who's in the call. Glad to have you here. So, when I started my MBA, by that time I decided to do it. I had already launched 7 businesses in the last 7 years. And along the way, I realized there were critical skills that still needed to develop, not just in terms of business competence, but also how I manage myself as a leader. So as I went through the program, it became clear that many of the challenges that I really struggled with in my ventures could have been addressed had I taken an MBA earlier. So I can definitely say that if I had pursued my MBA sooner, I would have avoided costly mistakes, unnecessary heartaches, and a lot of loss of time. So that's why I did my MBA.
How about for you, Craig?
Um, when I did this, I had been a practicing physician for that time, I think 18 years, and had uh, had some leadership positions within my department and the hospital. And I realized I didn't really like as well trained as I was to deliver anesthetics and take care of sick kids. I didn't really have any formal training around how to run an organization or how to affect an organization, how to lead, and these sorts of things. And I began to sort of think about I wanted to understand what made organizations fail or succeed, and what can leaders do to influence that. And in investigating MBAs, the IE Brown MBA really checked all those boxes for me. And so that's why I decided to pursue an EMBA.
Great. Talia?
Hi, everyone. For me, I was really at a critical junction in my career where I was becoming very specialized and sort of branching off down one route and really wanted to get back to the trunk of business. As you grow and climb the ladder, you are exposed more and more to P&Ls and making big business decisions. And often it would come across my desk and I knew a little bit about things, and I would nod along and make light decisions or ask for help, but I really wanted to feel confident in making those decisions. But more and more, the macro economics are affecting business, and I didn't feel confident to understand how inflation has an impact and interest rates was impacting. And when you're forecasting big business decisions, you need to fully understand that. So for me, it was really important to get back and be fully versed in business, and that's why I decided to do my EMBA.
Great. Thank you. The next one is thinking about like a favorite class, and there's ones that you go, boy, I just enjoyed that. But I think with the lens of if a motivation for all three of you, they were a little different in terms of what you were looking for, but common themes is so thinking about and kind of a bit of a lightning round is what was a favorite and impactful class? And we'll go with Mitch with you again.
Well, for me, there's so many actually that I love, but I will pick two. I would say entrepreneurial management and shared history of slavery and capitalism.
Great.
Why? Because for entrepreneur management, I learned about, the importance of aligning three things, which is your passion, the market need, and the capability to build a business around it. And then it helped me gain clarity also with my next steps. With Shared History of Slavery and Capitalism, which I really love by Professor Seth Rockman, and which sets IE Brown MBA apart. We have this subject, and this course really stands out for its deep exploration of the historical and ethical foundations of capitalism, particularly its ties to slavery. And this course really profoundly deepened my appreciation of the interconnectedness of history, of ethics, of economics, and its relevance in how we think about business and leadership today. So it has connection all the time. So this is a perfect example of how IE Brown EMBA is special and transformative as an EMBA program for me.
Great. Craig?
Um, it's a bit of a cop out, but it's hard to pick one. I loved nearly every course. There was not a course we did that, I sort of came away with, this could have been an email and or a reading assignment. I particularly loved the economics courses. I loved the global trends because it really dove into so many different topics that are driving the sort of geopolitics of the world. I loved Ed's class, the ethical stuff around business, because that's stuff I deal with every day, and it just really resonated with me. Brad's class on financial management was very important to me because I had not been exposed to that stuff before, and it was very enlightening. So I mean, there are a lot of courses that I really enjoyed as I look back.
Great. And Talia?
I have two, and what Craig's saying is he loved them all, but I have two that stick out for me. One is I Professor Jill Payne, she runs the leadership courses. She is a powerhouse woman in business and she's so experienced and she brings real world examples to the class. And I still have some of the leadership examples that she made us. Craig, you might remember us having to play a war game, and it stuck with me. I was in a business meeting, I had to make a leadership decision, and Jill's words were ringing in my head quite loudly. And then Professor Gail Allard, who's economics, I can easily recall one of her diagrams on how macro and microeconomics work together and all the different factors that affect it. And now when I read the newspaper and I see that interest rates are up or down, I fully understand Gail's teachings. So those are my favorite.
Oh, fantastic. And I hope that for those of you who are on this call, we are a relatively small program, as I mentioned, like 40, 50 students or so in a cohort. And what I hear time and time again from faculty is that these are topics that they teach regularly with a variety of different ages of MBA students. But IE Brown in particular, I think the richness of experiences that you all bring is something that helps them in their teaching as well, because you come with real world experiences and also a little bit of a BS meter of like, great, theory is fine, but how do I make this work? But I would hope that those who are on this call just see that it was just quite natural that all three of you use first names for faculty, that is part of this interactions that you have with faculty from both of these institutions. And without any prompting from me, it was like an even split between IE and Brown faculty that you just referenced. This is a little bit related, but it's thinking about your motivations, why you did it, and then you talked about classes that you liked. But um, I suspect there weren't any skills that you didn't have at all that this program provided. So often it's a way of looking at things differently and refining them. So I was thinking of for each one of you is like as you so there's also the subject matter that you touched in, but things that you feel that you do better in your professional life as a result. And maybe Talia, I'll go back around the horn in the opposite direction.
I think for me, the first thing that comes to mind is critical thinking. I know sometimes it's easy to read something and not really question its source or where it's come from. But in this course, we really had to criticize everything, the source that it came from, what you were teaching. We had people coming to the class with difference in opinions. And I loved how much I'm able to read a document now and really like criticize the information that I'm receiving. And then the other thing is just executive communication. You really like, we had word limits, we had presentation limits, and we had to communicate things quite concisely. So I loved that I'm able to now take something and then decipher it down.
Great. Craig?
I think there are a lot of skills that were really important to me to, once again go back to that understanding how organizations work and succeed and fail. A lot of the financial stuff that personally I had not been exposed to on an organizational level, the accounting really helped me understand when we're reviewing, various statements and spreadsheets, what these things mean and how you can look at these as indicators of health of an organization. I think a lot of the leadership and strategy skills have been incredibly useful. The leadership just helping understand what an effective leader does and looks like, and where you see these skills not being applied, and making the connection between that and failures in leadership.
And Mitch?
Yes, I think we have some similar answers for that. For me, there were three skills that I can think of, but there are so many skills I developed. So one of them is financial acumen for sure, leadership skills, and also entrepreneurial mindset. So financial acumen, we develop a much deeper understanding of financial management, from budgeting and financial analysis to interpreting financial statements. So those were important learnings, and they have become essential in making informed decisions for us in the organization in managing our own ventures, or in this case, my own startup. On leadership skills, I think one of the things I learned from Jill as well was, the difference between leadership and management, because I've always been like a manager, but then a leader is different. So that's very important for me and a crucial part of my learning. So it helped me strengthen my ability to lead teams, to drive change, and cultivate a positive organizational culture especially during times of uncertainty and transitions. And then the last one, which was entrepreneurial mindset, it's because I am an entrepreneur myself. And this was further reinforced and sharpened, I think, because I learned how to identify opportunities. We learned about design thinking, build innovative business models, and manage the risk of launching new ventures, fail fast, and all those. And it was really precious lessons for me because these are the things that are very important and for me to minimize, wasting time and wasting, uh, I mean, finances and all those. So that's very important. These lessons continue to guide me in spotting market gaps as well as in acting them on them with confidence. So those are the three major skills I can think about.
Oh, excellent, excellent. One thing that I haven't emphasized, if I had more time, I'd do either a soft, but I definitely address for people. This is a very demanding program. And I and probably by in terms of our design, the good thing is I'm on the front end where I'm working with prospective students and interviewing and applicants at all. And then I have to manage it. So if I am not upfront with people in the beginning that you really need to devote time to this and do a lot of balancing and organizing, then I end up having people in the program going, "Why didn't you tell me I needed to do this?" And all. So you will gain a tremendous amount. We hear that from alumni coming in, but it does require a very, very intentional clever ways of making it all work. And again, you have your full-time job. This is a program for people. It's sometimes 20, 25 hours a week that you need to put into reading, going to classes, meeting with your team. And then others have other personal commitments, family, elderly parents. They got all kinds of other things going on. So the questions to you three is advice that you might have about what worked for you or things that you kind of saw, wow, I tried this and it didn't, or I saw this with other people, so that those who are on the call right now who are thinking, okay, here's what it takes to succeed and really to get the most out of the program. So how about I'll start with you, Mitch, again. You can't tell, but I'm just looking at the Zoom tiles and I'm going back and forth.
No worries, no worries. So I'll be honest, it can be overwhelming sometimes, but nothing, I believe nothing worth doing is ever easy. So what helps me is practicing self-compassion and maintaining a growth mindset. So sometimes I don't know it yet, so I just have to figure it out, right? Family support is crucial from the start because you'll need them to lighten your load. And for example, my husband takes over the household whenever I'm in a residential program face to face in Madrid or Providence. So he has to just take care of the kids. So support may look very different for different people, but that's how it was for me. Time management was also essential. I set aside regular times during the day to focus on schoolwork and use as much productivity tools as I can get and be flexible. Be ready to adapt your plans as needed and give yourself grace when, things don't go as planned. It's all part of the learning journey, really.
Craig, thank you.
Um, yeah, I agree with Mitch. Like, I'm married and have three kids, and I'm not really sure how I would have done this without the support of my family. I think being very honest about the finiteness of the program, that it's not, this isn't like the new normal and it's going to go on forever, but also what I needed in terms of time. Same with my colleagues at work. Um, uh, and then, but I think like from the family perspective, when I did have time, making sure that I was really present, making sure that when you weren't immersed in, you know, writing papers or reading things, that you were present with these other aspects of your life. I put a lot of stuff on hold at work. I was able to do that. A lot of my academic work I just sort of put on hold for the year and a half. But it for me it was very much worth it. So
And Talia?
Yes, I will start by saying that you can do it. Like I know sometimes we lead into like, oh my gosh, it's a lot, but I'm not the most organized person in the whole world and I survived it. We had people in our cohort who were married, they had kids, people were going through divorces, they had a whole lot of things going on, but we all survived. Every one of us graduated. So I'll start off by saying that. Um, I will say lean on your team. I had an amazing team in my first quarter of the study block, and we were able to like we had advice from the cohort before us who said just be open with your communication. If one of you is drowning, don't put on a brave face and pretend. You all lean on each other. One of us, Eduardo, he's not on the call, but he was exceptionally organized. He downloaded all the readings for us. Moira time blocked us, and we were all helping each other. And I think that made such a huge difference in like we're all doing this together and it's different for all of us, but it's all very, very new. And so leaning on each other was incredible in that first quarter. And then it just gets easier as you go on. You kind of learn and you find your rhythm. I was personally someone that time blocked, so I would go to work and then in the evening spend time with the family and then stay up late to do my readings and watch lectures. And I found the style of the Brown, i.e., EMBA, amazing in that you've got the 2 week blocks in Madrid and in Providence, where you have sort of almost an intensive course to understand what you're going to learn. And then for the rest of the term, it's a little bit more paced where you like attend the lectures and do the forums. And you kind of get into this rhythm where you understand the subject and it's not like everyone trying to keep up. So, it's kind of designed to help you, but lean on the people in your team and have buy-in, like Craig said, with from your family, into the motivations.
Great.
yeah,
Well, thank you.
I just want
Okay.
to emphasize what Talia was saying about teams. You're not doing this by yourself, and your team can be an incredible resource as well as a long-term resource well beyond the program. So what she said is a spot on.
Great. And and all of you, I work hard. I love this program. But to see, what the time and a lot of it is what you can get out of it. And so that challenge of managing all of those aspects. So I also want to offer my appreciation to the three of you for, those sacrifices that your family made and colleagues and all. The last question that I have is just a kind of a fun, another relatively lightning round type thing. What's a favorite memory? What kind of sticks out for you? And I'll start with you, Mitch.
Well, for me, it would be the residences, the face to face, because I feel like there were deep connections that formed there among the cohort as well as the faculty. We enjoyed the rich cultural exchanges. I have a, in our cohort, there's a Japanese woman. There's they're all over the world. There's Mexic people from Mexico. So it was really a lot of those, and then a lot of networking and an opportunity to learn from diverse perspectives. So the program also strikes a perfect balance between rigorous academics, I think, and social engagement. While I wasn't initially active in after school dinners and drinks at the beginning, getting to know more people and sharing so many experiences made me realize how incredible our group was, and the camaraderie and enjoyment continue even beyond the program, just like what Craig said and Talia was saying. Like we still connect to each other. In 2 weeks, actually, I'll be meeting some of them for a ski trip. So it's an experience really that goes beyond education and offering lifelong friendships and great memories.
Great. Craig?
Um, I'm going to echo what Mitch said about the residencies. I loved Madrid, I loved Providence, and absolutely loved being in Cape Town. To me, like we had an ongoing rich debate in our cohort about the value of in-person versus remote work on
Yeah.
everything. And for me, there was no substitute for sitting in a room with my classmates and having a really rich discussion around a variety of issues and getting to know people and just spending time with people like who had very different backgrounds from me was to me the best part of the program.
Natalia?
I mean, I was going to say the same thing, but I'm going to come up with something new on the spot because but I will say I was in the room with some of the kindest, smartest, most unique people, and we all learned so much from each other. And as Craig said, like had healthy debates on topics and just yeah, go to those after university dinners because that's where all the friendships are made. But obviously Cape Town is a absolute standout. I think it's what makes the program different, and I loved the way that the course was designed to give you perspective outside our quite developed worlds. It's very unique. No other program offers it, in my opinion, in this way. And I know Brendan's there now. I'm very jealous that he's in Cape Town, but you're on the ground. You're getting real world experience. You're going into the townships. You're making a difference, and you definitely leave with an impact that I don't think you can read in a textbook or watch a slide or a lecture or have a discussion about. You have to feel it, and yeah, it was a standout.
Great. Well, I got my MBA a long, long time ago. They had not invented EMBAs at that point, and I wish I had done it because I just see the quality of experience that you had. It was very good for me. I still use the skills and some of the coursework that I have, but I luckiest guy that I get to learn from all of you and faculty like Ed. So thank to the three of you for your time today and sharing. I greatly appreciate it. It's great to see you. And I just hope that you can tell, it's like both Craig and Talia were in the same cohort, but the bonds that get developed in a program like this are lifelong. And it's both from personal help through as well as professional. So I thank you all for your time. As I mentioned, the recording will be sent to you. There were a few questions that were in the chat, and if Emma and I will make sure that we get back to you on the answers for those. Those were good questions. I apologize, but we ran out of time. So thank you for your consideration of IE Brown and the time to the panelists. And I wish you well. Website has contact information for all of us. It's a small program. I talk to pretty much all of the applicants myself. So I look forward to hearing from you all. Thanks and good day.
Thanks, y'all.